But let's start with those looming elections coming up next month. Here's the lowdown on what's at stake. On the 22nd of May, there'll be elections for local councils as well as European Parliament elections. All 32 London boroughs, 36 metropolitan boroughs, 74 district councils and 19 unitary authorities in England will all be elected. There'll also be shadow council elections in Northern Ireland for new super councils. There are also 5 mayoral elections in Hackney, Lewisham, Newham, Tower Hamlets and Watford. Results will be known from Thursday evening into Friday. For the European elections, all 751 members of the European Parliament will be elected across Europe. These elections take place every 5 years. 73 MEPs will be elected by people living in the UK. For the European elections, most of the results won't be announced until Sunday, the 25th of May, after voting has closed throughout the 28 member states of the EU. Well, we're joined now by UKIP's Patrick O'Flynn. Welcome back onto the programme, Patrick. Let's start with UKIP. Yes. They've rather dominated, to some extent, the news ahead of the elections, and not for all the right reasons. I mean, let's pick up on one of your local election candidates, William Hedwood, saying the actor and comedian Lenny Henry should emigrate to a black country. Is that acceptable?
Well, no, it's not acceptable. And we as a party are a non-racist, non-sectarian party, and we expect our members to uphold those values. And where things are brought to our attention, that it seems those values haven't been upheld, we examine it and we take a decision, and it's quite often to suspend or expel party members. What I'm not going to have is the implication in the media that this sums up who UKIP are. I mean, I've been around the country, particularly the eastern counties, in recent weeks and months, and the people I meet who are UKIP members and UKIP supporters are superb people who care about their communities, their families and their nation as well.
So what's going to happen to Mr Henwood?
Well, look, we have a disciplinary process and it's been pretty swift compared to some of the others. But you know, any party could be examined to the degree of scrutiny we're under, and I don't complain about the scrutiny, and horrible things would come to light. I mean,
were you shocked by the statement?
We've got more than 2,000 people standing in the local elections. It doesn't particularly shock me that a few of those will have said far-out, unpleasant things on social media, because we've also at UKIP got quite a fat dossier of things that actual elected councillors from the other parties have said, and at some point I think we'll be rolling that one out. It'd be interesting to see if the media is quite as interested.
Well, and equally, as you say, it's the scrutiny, and to some extent you have to accept that. If you're going to be getting that much of a profile, then you are going to have equal amounts of scrutiny too.
But it's not equal, is it? It's much more.
Well, we'll come on to that in a second. Will he still be a candidate for you?
We have disciplinary processes in place. I'm not going to prejudice that by coming on television and blarting off about one particular case. And my job as campaign and communications director for UKIP is to keep the big ideas advancing in the campaign, and I won't be deflected from that.
When will we know what will happen to Mr Henwood? I mean, as you say, it's not acceptable to you for one of your candidates to say that. There is a disciplinary process, but how quickly will we know what will happen to him? I mean, if you say it's unacceptable, it seems to me that he can't stand.
We have rules for standing at local elections which make it all but impossible to actually to chuck people retrospectively off ballot papers, clearly. But the party, you know, we deal with incidents swiftly and properly, and we are anxious to uphold our reputation as a non-racist, non-sectarian party.
Right, OK. Well, let's ask the other panel members. Is the party racist, Min Campbell?
I'm sure it isn't. On the other hand, it appears to have attracted a number of supporters, a number of candidates who demonstrate attitudes which, frankly, I find very, very uncomfortable indeed.
But do you accept the point that all the parties, will have characters like Mr Henwood who say those sorts of things?
Well, not necessarily those sorts of things. I mean, all the parties have got candidates who sometimes say things which the leadership would prefer they didn't say. But the point, of course, about UKIP is that at the moment it's riding high in the polls. It offers itself through Mr Farage, a kind of Teflon party. Of course, one of the problems about Teflon, eventually it wears out. And if you have a series of allegations of the kind we've seen over the last 3 or 4 days, there can hardly be complaints about the fact that the scrutiny is now rising. So I think I said on this programme once before when talking about UKIP, welcome to Test match cricket.
Yeah.
I mean, this is serious business now.
Exactly.
It's not a joke, it's not a protest, it's serious business, and you must expect serious scrutiny.
What about the posters, Tessa Jow? Hard-hitting posters that were launched with donations from Paul Sykes, one of the party donors, saying that British workers are hit hard by unlimited foreign labour. Were they good posters or were they racist?
I think the message of those posters was perfectly clear, that foreigners are putting your jobs at risk. And I thought they were extremely unpleasant. And incidentally, on Mr. Henwood. Actually, Henwood. Lenny Henry's tweet was the best last word, where he said, "I come from the black country, I come from Dudley," you know, which is just a glorious rebuttal of the kind of decency of him and the kind of decent country that all of us in different ways try to serve.
Can I jump back in? Because on Ming's point, there is actually a Liberal Democrat councillor who I think in UKIP we're making quite famous, equally to our own candidates, who was convicted of racially aggravated assault. And that's not someone saying something intolerable or unpleasant, that's somebody doing something intolerable or unpleasant. I would say to Tessa, the front of the Times newspaper today shows that we are speaking to a large constituency of people who would once have voted Labour.
Let me answer that specific.
Well, I don't know about the particular case, but if someone was guilty of that and was prosecuted, then I think that's a proper exercise of the police and of the judicial system. I'd like to be satisfied that everyone in UKIP who's voiced opinions of that kind is going to be dealt in the same way. The difference for UKIP now is that it's purporting, indeed the opinion polls support this, to be a party which is going to do very well in the European elections. And on that basis, then there's no room really for any complacency about some of the people who've been attracted to support
and
it.
on that basis, for the Conservatives particularly, never mind the bad publicity in some of these stories that have been in the papers, they are still riding high in the polls. Why?
I think that they are a party which appears to me to always try to preach hatred down to the lowest common denominator. And it's very easy to whip up a dislike of other groups of people or types of people or people from other countries. And that would appear to be the message that comes from UKIP. The sad thing is that many of the people that are at the moment currently thinking about voting UKIP are actually very good and decent people. And I've always maintained that if they took a much closer look at UKIP and their policies, they wouldn't actually like what they see. Well, and as far as I'm concerned, I would much rather fight elections, Patrick, and I'm sure Tessa and Ming would as well, on positive messages. We have differences between our parties. We're old, long-standing parties. We have long-standing differences. But the difference is that I would sit down with Tessa and with Ming and discuss policies and agree to differ and push forward a positive message rather than what they're saying.
Let's look at immigration. Let's have a look at immigration, because Nigel Farage talks about quality and quantity of immigrants. That seemed to be the whole basis of that poster campaign. And yet he was asked by one of my colleagues about the fact that he employs his German wife as secretary. Isn't that a contradiction in terms? Isn't that the sort of thing that we're getting? UKIP saying one thing, that these parties or the representative from other parties the voters don't trust them, they are not transparent enough, and yet here we have UKIP saying one thing and doing something very different.
Well, seeing as you raise it, Joe, I must say I thought that was a fairly extraordinary way for the BBC political editor to treat the launch of a major party's election campaign in a major set of elections.
But you take the point, don't you? I mean, there was another example of using one of the party's aides, the party events manager, Lizzie Vade, and trying to portray her as an ordinary citizen, and actually she works for the party.
Not to mention the Irish immigrant who's one of the documents.
Every party uses actors in their election communications.
You said you were supposed to be different. UKIP was going to be different to the other parties.
Well, we are different. I'll tell you how we're different, because we're actually offering the British people an immigration policy which controls immigration and won't give a complete open door to more than 24 neighbouring countries.
Quality immigrant, then, just to tell us, what is a quality immigrant?
Someone who has skills, investment, can create employment and subscribe to British values, right? What we're doing at the moment is a New Zealand brain surgeon or an Indian engineer will struggle to get into Britain, while a down and out from Eastern Europe has carte blanche to come, and that can't be in the national interest.
What's the difference with what the other parties say? I mean, all of the other parties are saying, yes, we do need to control immigration
but they can't
in some way.
Within the EU.
How do you answer that?
But we are members of the European Union. We have open borders as far as do our other European partners, and it's a two-way flow. I mean, almost as many people leave the UK to go and work in Europe as people come from other parts of Europe to work in the UK. And what has happened is that we've seen a lot of peddling of myths that decent people have accepted and believed about the proportion of migrants on benefits, about this feeding this sense that migration takes from the people who have lived here generation after generation.
So why have Labour apologised? Why have Labour apologised then for the immigration policies when they were in power?
Well, I don't actually think that an apology was necessary in the terms. I think that what people have said, I mean, Ed Miliband has said, Yvette Cooper has said, is that had we known now what we knew then, the numbers, although we proceeded with care in trying to predict how many people would come, the numbers were quite heavily awry.
Can I just briefly, though,
we would have put in place the transitional controls.
We need to go on, but just briefly, do you think UKIP's taken the Liberal Democrats' position as the sort of protest party, it's difficult?
Well, I'm rather sorry we didn't get onto more UKIP policies. For example, they were against same-sex marriage. They're against restriction of bankers' bonuses. They want to abolish inheritance tax. Now, if that's the substance of UKIP's message,
why are they doing so well in the polls then if you don't think those policies are good?
Because they're novel. Because Mr. Farage...
The Liberal Democrats used to do.
Because Mr. Farage purports to be a non-establishment figure, in spite of the fact he went to public school, he worked in the city, and he dresses like someone straight out of country life. So far, he's got away with it.
Yeah.
As I said a moment or two ago, this is a serious business. You must expect serious scrutiny.
All right,
and I think the real flaw with UKIP, and it will continue to be so, is it's a one-man party. Nobody can name anybody else in the party other than for really bad stories or bad constructs about them. But it's a one-man party, and there's a huge weakness there.
It's dog whistle politics.
Well, I think we'll be in a position after the European elections.
Proof will be in the pudding, won't we, when we see the results. But